Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this incredible town hall discussion we're about to have. My name is Ashley Land. This is my YouTube or my Instagram Live. Hello. And I am so honored to be with these incredible participants and my co-moderator. I am originally from Chicago. I live in Los Angeles now. I work at a production company, and I'm just so excited to have this discussion with some of my closest friends and to really, make sure this Black Lives Matter movement is not just a fad and it doesn't lose momentum. And so I'm super excited for what we have planned for today, but I have to, of course, introduce my amazing co-moderator, Paul Carter. So Paul, do you want to tell the people a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So I'm Paul Carter. I met Ashley in college. We also worked together in a past life. Currently, I'm working at a college, working with in supporting Black students on campus. And outside of work, I host a podcast called Mood Ring Radio, and I feel like creativity and music is one way I try to channel joy and resistance through just being creative and doing something that I feel like is going to sustain me in the long run. And so I'm appreciative of the space, and I also want to appreciate you, Ashley, because as much as we are here to hold allies accountable, it's also I feel empowered to be here and feeling like I'm a part of a movement. So thank you for opening up this space.
Thank you. And of course, it wouldn't be a moderated discussion without people to discuss with. And so I wanted to introduce my amazing participants, friends, ride or dies, allies, Black people, because they are really what's going to make this incredible. And so since the screen looks different on all of us, I'll just call on each one of you all to speak. And so we are going to start with Minnie.
Hi, my name is Minnie. I'm an assistant at a talent agency. Sorry, my PGB is she and her. Overall feelings, overwhelmed, frustrated, tired, but kind of feeling cathartic almost, like letting out emotions and feelings. So yeah.
And then we're gonna go to Diana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diana. I use she, her pronouns. I teach high school in South Central Los Angeles. And overall, I'm just excited to be here to talk about the commitment, lifelong commitment of doing anti-racist work and abolition work, and of really learning and unlearning. So I'm really happy to be here.
And then we're going to go to Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I work with Ashley at a production company, and I'm really looking forward to talking with all of you. I'm grateful to be here and cautiously optimistic that more people around me are paying attention right now.
And we're going to go to Oscar.
Hi everyone, my name is Oscar Alvarez. My preferred gender pronouns he, him, his. I was born in Mexico. Ever since the age of 2, I've been living here in South Central, and now I'm organizing in South Central with Community Coalition. And like peers, I'm honored to be here. It's a very important and timely conversation that I hope, like Ashley mentioned, we continue to have it for the long run.
And Timothy.
What's good, y'all? My name is Timothy. I am a recent graduate at San Francisco State, majored in political science and minor in Africana studies. I'm just excited to have this conversation. We definitely need to talk more about what's going on. I'm here to just talk my shit. That's pretty much it.
And I'm gonna go to Madi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maddie. My preferred pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a forever aspiring ally and co-conspirator in this space, and I just feel really grateful to be here to ultimately listen to what everyone has to say, but as well as contribute where I can. So thank you for creating this space.
And James?
Hi, everyone. I'm James. I use he, him pronouns. I help grassroots nonprofits kind of run their operations so that leaders on the ground can focus on the work they want to do. Really honored to be here. Yeah, just excited for like a real conversation that's really timely, and I'm definitely feeling a mix of there's a lot of negative emotions, but there's also, when there's chaos and tragedy, there is some hope on the horizon. So I'm curious to hear how people are feeling and what possibilities people see.
And Joseph?
Hey everyone, Joseph Kisol, coming in from Oakland, California. Use he, him pronouns. I'm an artist, I'm a musician, I do graphic design for a lot of social justice orgs about housing justice currently. My identity is crazy, and I lived in North Carolina, and Massachusetts, and California, Florida. I'm Asian and Latino. So I'm like all over the map in terms of who I know and what I've seen and ways I think. So I kind of like just have a lot of hope and want to create space that, will affirm all of us and just get creative about solutions. That's what I'm about. So yeah.
And Ernesto?
Hey everybody, I'm Ernesto. I also go by Undocubate. That's my storyteller name, my artist name, if you will. I work at a nonprofit in South LA called Community Coalition. And I'm here because I know Ashley. I love her. She's incredible. But more than just the invitation, it really is a stepping into being able to share my experience, and then also what non-Black Latinx communities can do to really push forward, characters, personas, just livelihood of being anti-racist. And so that's why I'm here, to also learn, but also share how my community can be more of an ally in the space, and I use him, his pronouns.
And we're gonna go to Shar.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sharjah. I go by she, her, hers pronouns, and I am a journalist, more so entertainment, but I've been having these hard conversations amongst my community. So I'm looking forward to learning, maybe being introduced to some interesting talking points, some interesting thoughts, because I kind of already know where I'm coming from with this particular conversation as a Black woman surviving in America. So.
And Diana. Oh, we did Diana. Okay, and that's everyone, sorry. I'm slightly nervous, but it's gonna be okay because we're literally just having a conversation that we will have anywhere, at home, at work, all these different things. And so thank you all so much for joining once again. I'm just gonna pull out my little paper to make sure that I'm hitting all the points. And so just to set the context, we hear the rallying cry Black Lives Matter a whole lot more now than, than the work that they've been doing since about like 2013. And so the main things that I really want us to get out of this discussion is kind of like, what makes this movement different than what it was already looking like? How can non-Black people of color and white allies really stay accountable and make sure this movement doesn't lose momentum? And how can we support Black people, Black conversations, and, like breaking down and dismantling white supremacy on a more daily basis? And so I really wanted to do that by setting the context. And so this nation was founded literally on white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And so as much as this movement is about Black Lives Matter, as much as it is about, against police brutality and state-sanctioned violence, it's also about the anti-Blackness that permeates in all of our communities in different ways. And so I really wanted to make sure this conversation is centered on Blackness, what we can do to, promote Blackness in everyday conversations, etc. And, we're talking about thousands upon thousands of people that are protesting right now. I think they said that we have now reached protests in all 50 states, in an additional 20 plus countries. But, I wanted to shine some light on some of the recent deaths or murders, should I say, that made that happen. And so I wanted to quickly just inform people who may not know about these recent deaths and the status of their cases. And so, we have people like Ahmaud Arbery on February 23rd. He was a resident of Brunswick, Georgia. He was shot dead while jogging, literally jogging out in his neighborhood. He was unarmed, only 25 years old. The 3 white men responsible for his murder appeared in court on June 4th, and the presiding judge ruled that there was enough evidence to pursue murder charges against those involved. But we also, have to remember that, again, this was because of the pressure of people in the movement. Breonna Taylor, another innocent life that was taken by state-sanctioned violence shortly after midnight on March 13th in Louisville, Kentucky. Police officers were executing a search warrant at her house. They used a battering ram to crash into her apartment. She was 26 years old. She was an emergency room technician. After a brief confrontation, they fired several shots at her, striking her at least 8 times. According to the Louisville Courier-Journal, the police that were investigating it believed that people were selling drugs outside of her home. And that was the reason why her life was taken. On June 5th, Breonna Taylor would have been 27 years old. Louisville's FBI office announced they were opening an investigation into the circumstances surrounding her death. But when we also talk about this movement, we have to talk about how, we're not shining enough light on the women who are taken by, state-sanctioned violence. We're not shining enough light by the trans people that are taken by state-sanctioned violence. And so that's just another person. George Floyd, a name that people really, know very well by this point, was really kind of the main catalyst, although all of these lives matter. May 25th, George Floyd, 46-year-old Black man, died in Minneapolis, Minnesota, after a white police officer knelt on his neck for about 9 minutes while Floyd was handcuffed and lying face down on the street. The 2 other officers further restrained Floyd, who had been arrested on suspicion of using a counterfeit bill. So because he had counterfeit money, that's why he lost his life. He repeatedly said the words, "I can't breathe." And, the officers ignored on the bystanders' pleas to remove his knee from his neck because he couldn't breathe. And by the time the medics got there, he was already, resting in heaven. And so this was really a controversial one because once the footage came out and because protesters and, people put pressure, we finally saw that all of the officers were charged. One was charged with 2nd-degree murder, one was 3rd-degree murder, and then 2nd-degree manslaughter. And then the others were charged with 2nd-degree murder. And lastly, one that you all may not know of, but I think it's important to highlight is Tony McDade. On May 27th, a Tallahassee Police Department officer was responding to a stabbing incident when they came across Tony McDade, a transgendered man who was identified as a suspect to a stabbing incident. And they said he was armed with a knife and a handgun, but a police officer fatally shot him, making his death at least the 12th violent death of a transgender or gender non-conforming person so far in the US, according to the Human Rights Campaign. And so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, I think it's important to uplift that all Black Lives Matter. And, you know, George Floyd is a name that is really prominent. I've been to 4 protests so far this week, and we're talking about it, but we have to make sure we're including all Black lives. And so, you know, I couldn't help, the activist in me couldn't help but want to do more and say more. And I really wanted to make sure I had this conversation for everyone to see, like, these are the conversations we need to be having on a daily basis. We need to make sure we're getting involved as much as possible. And so I really wanted to call on everyone here and at home to just be open and to challenge each other and to really, you know, think of what's best for the defense of Black lives and uplifting Black lives at this time. And so with that, I want to kick it to Paul with some community agreements before we start the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley, for opening us up. And yeah, I really want to first encourage everybody to hold all those names in your heart as we're having this conversation, and the many other names that we know and the many that we don't, because we're talking about lives and we're talking about real people and folks in our communities, folks that you know, have been lost to this movement, but you know, we are like really here to honor them and also ensure that we can do something about the names we hopefully don't have to know in the future, right? So you know, we honor their names and we hope that we're doing something to encourage and empower each other to do something about that. So keeping that in mind as we have this conversation. So just jumping into our community agreement, I'm going to start by asking everyone to be curious, open, and respectful. It's something I already trust that you all will uphold, but as we, and being brave to challenge each other, but in a respectful way, right? So we might call each other in and not out, meaning that if we're challenging someone, we're challenging their idea, not them as a person. And we're providing our challenge of that idea and our critique of that idea. No one knows everything, but together we know a lot. So no individual in this space is going to have all the answers, but collectively there's so much knowledge that we hold. And so keeping that in mind as we have this conversation. We take care of ourselves. So if you need to step away for anything, if you need to stretch, eat, just check in with your body, do what you need to do. And that's completely cool. And just feel free to do that. And you don't have to let us know ahead of time. You can just go ahead and do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Confidentiality. So we're not speaking for others without explicit permission from that person. So let's use I statements and speak from our own experience, not from the experience of others, unless you have permission from that person to share their stories. One mic. So we're going to use one voice at a time. Make space for Black voices. So if there's a Black person who wishes to speak or give a rebuttal, let them. And generally, we're gonna ensure that we're leaving enough space for folks to, for everyone to contribute to the conversation. And throughout, if we're gonna ask folks to spend about 90 seconds to 2 minutes at most to respond to any given question. And if we're seeing a need to wrap things up for the sake of time, we'll give you a little thumbs up like this. And that'll just be a sign to start wrapping up. For Black folks, y'all do you. You don't gotta stop. Next, avoid jargon, acronyms, and isms. So we're gonna use inclusive language, so language that folks don't have to have any doctorate degree to understand, right? So we're communicating in terms that everybody in our community is gonna uphold and understand. And so these academic terms, they have real meaning, so let's use the real meaning. And also, if you have an academic term that is the best way to describe something, just give us an explanation of what you're talking about. Speak from your own experience, use I statements. We touched on that. And then focus on intent versus impact. So we're not gonna focus on the intention of, no matter the intention, we're gonna be responsible for the impact. So if something that you said lands on someone in a way that is impacting them negatively, and like feel free to raise that up and not to defend yourself in terms of your intention, but be open to accepting the impact that it had. And we're going to move forward with continuing not to cause harm in the space, and learn how we can utilize our language to have a better impact in the future. So with that, I want to ask if there are any other guidelines and community agreements that folks want to raise up before we get started with our first question to start our discussion.
And before you start, Paul, I just wanted to quickly, I forgot, but it's important to me. I just want to quickly do a moment of silence for all of those who have lost their lives, and we're going to dedicate this discussion to them. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ashley. So if there are no other community agreements to raise up, I'm going to get us started with our first question of the discussion. So our first question is about how we felt with the recent state-sanctioned violence and deaths of countless Black lives following those events of recent deaths of Black lives. How has that affected you mentally and physically? Are there any resources or practices that you've been using to help you get through this time? So this is a question tapping into like the physical and the like emotional impact that this moment has had on us. And just want to ask folks, what have you been doing to care for yourself? How have you been recognizing the mental or physical impact it's had? And are there any practices you can share with folks?
Well, I guess I'll go first. For me, emotionally, I think it's taken the biggest toll. I really haven't had any type of physical side effects to the news, to the headlines that have been coming out. But I know just, dealing with the quarantine of COVID and dealing with, all of the Corona headlines and being inundated with that throughout the past 60 days. And then it felt like May in particular, we just started getting a lot of headlines because, even with Ahmaud Arbery, that happened in February, but it didn't surface till like late April, early May. And then it just seemed like we were not given the space to come up for air, so to speak. It definitely has taken a toll on me mentally, though, especially witnessing some of the discourse that's happened online regarding some of these cases and just seeing just how vile and nasty some people can be when the facts are right there. So yeah, it's definitely, I've had some rough days and some rougher nights within these last few weeks.
I would say personally for me, usually so these things happen all the time, right? And I would say for the first thing that kind of like the videos and like everything that like you will see on social media, it'll be like right in front of our face. And I think I made sort of like an intentional decision this time to sort of like not watch it and like not sort of like just take my eyes off of that because I already know how I'm gonna react to it. I'm gonna react in like an emotional state. I'm gonna, try to pick out like everything that this person did wrong, what they did right, how they could have avoided it, or just allow myself to be consumed with like the violence. So I would say like I didn't allow it to affect me emotionally this time. And I think it's pros and cons to that just because on one end, I think I was able to see the situation a little bit more clear. And not allow myself to react so fast and then burn myself out. On a flip end, I think it allowed me to be a little bit more active physical You know, as soon as it happened and like it went viral, I think there was like a string of protests that came up, and I kind of preserved a lot of my emotional energy and kind of I used that in a different environment. I think a lot of times I would just kind of be consumed with it in my room, or you know, I could talk to a friend about it, but just trying to be a little bit more strategic about how I let it, you know, affect me right then and there, just so I can not burn myself up quickly.
Absolutely. Thanks y'all for sharing that.
With that, you know, I feel like it was important to uplift, like, I've heard a lot of discourse around, well, not all cops are bad cops. And so I really wanted to just make it clear, like, it's not about the person no more so than the system that cops and police are built upon, which is a white supremacist, inherently biased system. And so I wanted to ask the group, like, what have your interactions personally been with cops? What did it look like? What did it feel like? What did it sound like? And how has that like influenced your overall view of them?
I can share a little bit about my experience, but as I mentioned, I was born in Mexico. Ever since the age of 2, I came here here in South Central, and so ever since then I've been residing here. And I think just South Central communities of color, historically, South Central has been a Black community, right? And so ever since growing up again in South Central, my neighborhood, I was actually there was about like 3 Latinx families on my block, right? And so ever since then, it's been a lot of like a lot of Black folks that I would say that have been displaced, and a lot of that displacement has been facilitated by a lot of over policing, right? And so I think for me, growing up undocumented, I was always it's the same systems, right? That as Ashley you mentioned, they're upheld by white supremacy, right? And so in this case, being undocumented, you are also forced to live in fear. A lot of the times it's like the one strike rule where you mess up once and you're out, right? Your family's out. And that's the same mechanism. Separation of families is the same thing that they use, right? And so I was able to see that being a lot of the times forced on Black bodies in my neighborhood. And then I was also able to go home and then be told by my mom, like, avoid cops at all times, right? And so I think for me now, there's definitely like no comparison between like Black and brown bodies. But I think because it is through the same system, it is upheld by the same white supremacy. You know, we are again experiencing a lot of, especially if you live in communities like South Central, right? Communities of color, predominantly Black communities. And so I think for now, even if y'all know about like the immigration discourse, we have like a Supreme Court case that's going to be decided on recently, right? And a lot of the times immigration, we don't talk about like Black lives as much, right? And so when we talk about those things, what does ICE mean? What does policing mean? All that. I think now is more important than ever to talk about like Black lives in the immigration discourse. And so, but I think that again, that's been that has shaped a lot of how I see those institutions. For me, they're all the same, and for me, I mean, it's a lot of fear.
I'm exactly who these systems are designed to protect, and have absolutely encountered the police in that way, where in the few interactions that I've had with the police force, it's always been very protective to the point of being infantilizing, which carries its own stuff, but it was never in a threatening way. And it took a lot of unlearning to really understand the violence of that system and the white supremacy that it perpetuates since its inception, because I'm exactly who it's been designed to protect.
And just to add to that, just my whiteness not being seen as a threat. And I say that with disclosing that I have been in contact with the police. I have gotten myself into some pretty severe trouble for whatever that means or what that costs. And I understand that when I was approached and by cops, multiple cops with guns out, understanding that there was a quick second to respond and understanding seeing a white body and how that is viewed differently. And yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say than that, other than just how Blackness is so weaponized in America.
Right, and related to that question, oh, sorry, were you gonna jump in? Okay, so related to that question about like how folks have used this term, not all cops are bad cops. We've also seen like the movement co-opted from being called Black Lives Matter to folks saying all lives matter. So, so between those two phrases, not all cops are bad cops and all lives matter, you could either choose one or both. How do you see, how do you address that question? Or if someone is genuinely coming from a place of, I just don't understand, and they genuinely think like not all cops are black cops, or I believe Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter. How do you respond to that? And I'll call up a few folks, and then if anyone else wants to chime in, feel free. So I'm going to aim this one at James, Diana, and Timothy. So how do you respond to not all cops are bad cops, all lives matter?
I'll go on the not all cops. I just think to me it's pretty clear. One way I'll talk about this is I think we talk about systemic racism so much, it sometimes confuses people because they're like, well, if the system is racist, like where is it written down? Like we all, like all the rules are the same. And to me, systemic racism, to break it down in a simple way, is that it's a system that allows individual people to be racist, and the system doesn't prevent that from happening. The people around them either encourage it or will look the other way. So when we talk about like the phrase ACAB, or if we say not all cops are bad, I believe if you work at a place that will allow, someone else to kill people, to plant drugs on them, to just like, I think what the police, every single precinct, you pick any town, city, county around the country, there are police who are abusing their power. And I think whoever the good cops are not speaking up about it, or they are scared to speak up. Like in New York City, cops that spoke up were called like rats and had rats like nailed to their desk. Like, I think it's impossible to be a good cop in that scenario, and most good cops just kind of go along with it and keep their heads down. And so I don't know how that's good or something that we should admire, or that's my answer.
And
Yeah,
just
oh, go ahead, Shar.
Oh, okay. Are you sure? Oh, okay. Just to kind of piggyback off of that, I think that it needs to be examined, right? A lot of people that are labeled good cops are indeed complicit and bystanders to the things that the quote unquote bad cops do and the harm that they inflict. And I also find it, just as a Black person in this country, to be extremely exhausting to have some of these talking points. Like I find it disingenuous if someone is coming to me with this sort of like naive, clean slate as to, the all lives matter, Black Lives Matter debate, because I feel like this is such a conversation that has kind of been beat into the ground, so to speak, that everyone in every corner of the world, for the most part, knows what is going on. And I look at all lives matter as a co-opting, of course, of Black Lives Matter. And it's there to gaslight. It's there to be inflammatory, you know, because I'm sure we've all seen, you know, the ideas and the rhetoric bouncing off online and on TV that all lives can't matter until Black lives do. So what are you really trying to say? And so that's what makes these conversations, it feels like a never ending hamster wheel. And I feel like it slows up progress because it clouds the conversation. We should be having difficult, challenging conversations. But if we keep talking about the exact same things when access to resources are there, people are just choosing to be willfully ignorant, we're not going to get to second base with this thing. You get what I'm saying? So it can be a bit exhausting. And I know personally, I would not entertain someone who came to me saying, Shar, can you please break down to me why all lives matter is a dumb thing to say type thing, because you're not accessing, you're not utilizing the resources right in front of you. We carry smartphones in our pockets and purses every day. So just as easily as you can hop on social media to gaslight Black people, you can also hop on Google to do the damn research yourself.
Can I respond to that? Or we have a queue? I'm not sure how to get in line.
Oh no, just I think anybody can open up. I was just trying to point folks out so we don't have pauses, but just go for it. Let's keep it organic.
Okay, cool. First off, I want to say, Shar, thank you for saying all of that. That's so real, and that is so exhausting. And I find myself as like a non-Black person of color in this in-between of like, I'm exhausted of saying the same shit, but I don't want people who are more directly affected by this to keep having to do the work. So I'm like, y'all take a backseat. It's up to us to reach out and have these conversations, because for my family personally, when my grandparents came, we all tried to be white, like plain and simple, became Christian, moved to the white neighborhoods, like et cetera, et cetera. And these past years, we're realizing like after all those efforts, it still didn't work. We're still not accepted. There's always this inequality. But in that, I have family members who are like, I'm half Filipino, half white. I'm Puerto Rican and I live in Orlando, Florida. Sorry for the subtweet, but like they're in Trump territory. And like, I've been seeing this All Lives Matter come out from like aunties. And I'm like, what? I thought you were like, we're Afro-Puerto Rican, like we're people of color. Like, what is this Trump stuff? And I am kind of under the impression that people heard All Lives Matter before they heard Black Lives Matter because of where they are, who's around them, what rhetoric they're feeding into. And this is another failure of our education system, where it produces poor working class white people, working class brown people in predominantly white communities that aren't thinking critically, and literally having to explain them. I'm explaining to uncles and aunts because no one has taken the time. And every time they try to say something, they're like, you're stupid, you're trash, I'm unfriending you, I'm blocking you, for some like coastal cousin in San Francisco has no time for it. And this is where I'm seeing this breakdown, because there's people out here who are just literally like following, they need wanting a strong leader, haven't had built that like critical thinking inside. And like my family is like going back and forth right now on Facebook about shit because they're like on both sides of this thing and like are talking on comment feeds. So yeah, I'm gonna pause, step back there, yeah.
Can I just add to that? Can I swing through? I think that you brought up an interesting point in that it is going to take people within their own communities to call this out. Because I feel like Black people, well, we know Black people have been literally shouting these things at the top of their lungs for generations, right? So it is going to, I want to thank you for that. Thank you for introducing those conversations and challenging, you know, certain family members. But my message to people, to non-Black people of color, is largely one that you know, just to borrow from Audre Lorde, I can't remember the exact quote, but assimilation will not save you. So it's noted that white supremacy affects us all. It affects our daily lives. It affects the ways in which a lot of us move about the world to this day. But assimilation and proximity will not save you. And that's what I need non-Black people of color to understand. You know, theoretically, when quote unquote, they're done with us, who do you think they're coming for next? Like, it's not good enough to think that because you identify as maybe half white, even if that is the case, but you know, you could, you being ethnic, when these neo-Nazis and these racists look at it, they look at whiteness as purity, okay? So the point that I'm trying to make is assimilation and proximity will not save you. And I think that it's going to take, I don't know what it's gonna take. Like I said, I just wanna thank you for even getting the ball rolling, because they're not going to listen to it coming from us. And history has shown that. So thank you for that.
And I'm gonna let you go, Nimi. But I also wanted to throw it in there because I just have heard a lot of discourse from the non-Black community around this idea of like, why are people looting? Why are they burning down their own communities? So I wanted to throw that in there, along with what Shar is saying around like how like non-Black, you know, people of color are kind of trying to stay in this zone of like political correctness and like assimilation. If people want to speak on that, Nimi, I know you had a thought.
Actually, it's kind of related to that. I've been thinking about this a lot, is that POCs, especially non-Black POCs, have a habit of just lumping all issues, privileges, experiences, narratives as POC, rather than realizing that we as South Asian, Asian, any non-Black POCs have certain privileges that Black people in America do not have. And there's that disconnect, right? There's that disconnect that, oh, but if I can do this, like, why can't Black people do the same thing? And I think, especially, I think coming from a first generational family, you see that people don't realize that not all narratives are the same. Not everyone has the same, you know, history in this country. They don't have the same privileges. People don't see us the same way as they see a Black person, you know? And it comes again with the looting, you know, they assimilate to, you know, it comes to colonialization too. If we really, like, if we want to go through that discourse too, right? Of, you know, like this idea of assimilation goes into looting, you know, of, you know, you have to be part of society, you know, that we should be bounded to the social construct of keeping things together. But when the social contract has been violated by violence through, you know, racial injustices towards Black people, like, why are we sticking to this, you know? But it goes back to colonialization, and where people still stuck to the this social contract, even though white people, you know, the oppressors have come and looted our countries and they've taken and pillaged, you know? Sorry, I feel like I'm going off tangent, but I think to go back what I was saying, I wanted to say as POCs, you know, we need to focus a lot on allyship. You know, there's this umbrella, but really there are sections, and that we should be, you know, to be in unity is more like we need to be in allyship. We need to focus and center our attentions in helping other people who don't have the same privileges that someone like me has. So I'm sorry, that was so all over the place, but I feel like they all kind of circle together, you know, like we need to step it up. Like we can't, you know, there's also this whole idea of appropriation too, right? And we appropriate the culture, but when it comes to disadvantages, we step back, you know, and we got to stop doing that, you know? So sorry, I just went on a rant, but.
No, yeah, and I think to add to that, for non-Black, Latinx, specifically, I'm talking about like Mexican and Mexican American communities, the fact that you are a person of color doesn't make you brown, right? And that brings up another conversation about colorism in our communities. And to really understand the ways in which like we all benefit from white supremacy, and to know that you have to work towards abolishing something that has directly benefited you is so important. And I think back to the question about not all cops are bad, and similar to the conversation about looting and property and etc., to really talk about abolition, to really talk about doing anti-racist work, to really talk about being pro-Black, we have to talk about abolishing capitalism. And this idea that prisons, that the carceral state, that police was founded on the convict prison leasing system, where the main priority of this country was profit over people, right? And the fact that prisons profit over free labor still to this day, the fact that the 13th Amendment is still in the Constitution. And similarly, so this really, I think, infuriating narrative, and especially in Spanish media, that the violence and the looting and et cetera, right, is directly related to our buy-in into capitalism and our buy-in into property that values property over lives. And so the conversations that I've been having with my family and with my students is that you can replace a building, you can replace all these material things, but you can't replace a life. And all of these things that the media tries to derail us, the message that they try to derail us, we have the power to bring it back to the real cause, which is the murder of Black folks and the ongoing white supremacy. And I think to the other point is, like, again, it's up to us to end these systems. And I saw this tweet recently that is like, oh, I lost an aunt today, like nothing happened, she's just racist. And like this idea of canceling racist members out is a privilege. And for all of us that benefit from these systems, for non-Black people of color and non-Black Latinx communities, like, you have to do that work, and we have to do that work of engaging, because it's up to us. And understanding that we benefit from it is just the beginning of working towards abolishing it.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, like we've talked about like how allies can be in allyship, how allies can call out anti-Blackness in their respective communities. How do y'all feel that non-Black people of color can center Blackness in your communities and support the Black Lives Matter movement in an intentional way? Like, what are some of the tangible things that you feel you can do as individuals that can be reciprocated across your community to center and support Blackness?
Just because it's right here in my mind, I think for non-Black, specifically, again, non-Black Latinx communities, there's a place for you in this movement. Wherever you are, whatever you do, wherever you work, there's a duty for you to disrupt, right? When we have companies stand for racism, yet they hire like their employees are 2% Black, right? When you have colleges saying we don't stand for racism, right, but they don't care about like Black college students and their graduation rates and dropouts and all these, and like how they're not supporting students. And then you have nonprofits saying we don't care about racism, but there's no pipeline for Black leadership in the organizations. It's like, wherever you are, whatever you do, and not to mention education. I mean, that is the most oppressive space for perpetuating anti-Blackness, right? So I think as an educator, it's like really adopting an anti-racist, a pro-Black and abolitionist pedagogy in the classroom is so important. And I think, again, wherever you are, like, there's a place for you, you're needed, and it's your duty. It's all of our duties, right? To continue to disrupt these conversations.
Go ahead, Timothy.
You go ahead. Go for it.
No, Timothy, I think you wanted to say something, brother. So go ahead, and then I'm gonna tag right next to you.
Yeah, mine is pretty simple and it's straightforward. And I want this to, I mean this in the most respectful way too. I think on the flip side, like on a different, on the spectrum, like as much as you could do a lot of things, like specifically for people of color, I feel like sometimes you need to know when, like, just to be quiet, like, and like allow people to go through the motions and go through using their own voices and using their own avenues. I think a lot of times when people go viral or they get in trouble about certain things that they said, it's because they were better off not saying that, like, in the first place. Until you get educated or you get your own stuff situated, and like I don't mean that in like a disrespectful way. I just think like it's kind of toxic and it's kind of irresponsible of certain people to kind of use their platforms or use their voices when they're not in a space to really use that to the best benefit of the people that they're talking about.
Yeah, I agree, brother. I think that was something that I wanted to kind of connect to. I mean, I think Diana just really laid it out like any professor would be able to lay it on you, right? Like boom, 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 boom. This is what we are able to do, or we should be in a position to do. And, you know, I think for me, someone who is also a POC that is not Black, like the way that I carry my intention, right, and showing up to any places where these conversations are taking shape is like, I have to first listen. I have to just sit there, listen, be able to understand, like, is my voice gonna add anything to the conversation? Or when they're asking a direct question, like, boom, like maybe I can answer it. And in this particular way, like hearing Diana, you know, talk about it in connection to anti-Blackness and capitalism, like connecting those two, like bringing those two as close to each other as possible is one way to do it, right? On a kind of macro level. And one of the things that I, you know, for example, in my own household, because I think at the end of the day, it turns out with like having direct, clear, one-on-one conversations with your loved ones, who oftentimes are the most difficult to even try to have a conversation with. You know, for me, it's really been about educating and having a Q&A or just like a reflection conversation with my nieces and nephews who are a lot lighter than I am, right? And like I am, you know, I consider myself, I'm a person of color that is not brown in hue, right? So I understand what a lot of those privileges do come, where they do come. And when I have these conversations with my nieces and nephews, like it literally is just being able to say, like, what do you feel about this, right? I asked my nephew a very clear question about like, what do you think about joining a protest and going to a protest in Riverside, in an area that is now seeing a lot more Black folks migrating to the Riverside area to be able to get housing, jobs, education, all the rest, and seeing how his community has also been changing. And he's like, you know, Theo, I don't know if I'm ready to support. And I was like, okay, boom, let's talk about it. Tell me why you're not ready to support. And I think that because we have that relationship with our siblings or our loved ones, like I can allow a space for them to like, just fuck up, like say the wrong shit, say what you need to know, so that then we can identify that you're fucking up or being politically incorrect is not enough. You cannot stop there. Like make whatever mistake you need to make, call it what it is, and then we can move from that step. You know, at the end of the day, he wasn't going to show up and he wasn't ready to show up, but at least he identified one thing. Obviously, he is not Black. And because he is not Black and I'm not Black, we are not in a position to tell other people, other Black people, what to do, how to feel, how to act, how to react. And he kind of was like, oh my God, like, that is right, because his initial thought was, I can't believe that Black people are doing this. And this is the way that they're responding. So at the end of the conversation was like, can you believe it now? Even just in this 45-minute long conversation, you are not Black. And at this point, you cannot pass on those judgments on how to be, how to protest, how to react, and how to be. So that to me was a small, tiny window of a baby step that my nephew is making forward. And listen, do I have a lot of work to do? Absolutely. Like so many different levels. But, you know, for me, there's macro, there's in all kinds of levels. And then it's just finding your place and where you can take an opportunity to hear, learn, and possibly even teach if there's something to teach.
I just want to jump in really quickly and reiterate the importance of education and history, because those two things, of course, would provide, you know, hearkening back to the example that Ernesto just gave with his nephew, to provide a landscape or a framework as to why people are reacting the ways in which they're reacting right now. And I think, I don't want to get my quotes mixed up, but I think it was Jane Elliott who was quoted as saying that the American education system is not real education, it's more so indoctrination, because we get a very, very cookie cutter version of historical events. And that, I believe, directly links back to why a lot of racists in particular are trying to tone police the ways in which Black people are reacting to this by evoking the words of Martin Luther King and peaceful protests, but all the while ignoring that, we would be able to possibly ask MLK his thoughts on the current state of today if he was not murdered by white supremacists. So it's like, what is it? Do we peacefully protest? Like, what advice now do you have? Because we would be able to tap on his shoulder if y'all didn't take him out. So I feel like and for myself, a lot of things I had to go research by myself, or if not in undergrad, then literally by myself, because of the framework that the American educational system laid in front of me growing up. I wasn't learning certain things. And there is a reason. We can maybe tip it to white supremacy. There's a reason why certain things are not taught, and why certain things are not emphasized, and why certain things are only spent, maybe a week lesson on. A lot of white people, for example, can't name Black history figures outside of Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and maybe Harriet Tubman. You get what I'm saying? So I think that type of educational framework is extremely necessary when navigating these conversations. And it's on everyone's shoulders, right? It's not only on Black people, it's on everyone's shoulders. Everybody could benefit from picking up a book and doing the work. Show your work, as we'd say in math. So.
If I can add to, I think also speaking on behalf of me as a Latino male in Latinx community, we have a lot of work to do, right? And when we talk about anti-Blackness, we have a lot of work. A lot of our information and sources rely on like two major networks, which is like Univision and Telemundo, right? And these networks like deeply perpetuate like anti-Blackness, and it's crazy because that's the only things that are like our families are relying on, right? And so I think for allyship, we really need to dig in and do our own research and really, go out of our way to understand all of these conversations in ways that go beyond like networks that uphold again that white supremacy. Even like the vast majority of reporters in these networks are like white passing Latinx folks, right? And so it really is centered and upheld like that. Another thing I'll say is that right now we are at a very, very particular time where, we're going through a pandemic. We're going through and this pandemic is causing a lot of increasing the gaps, right? And a lot of those, I think we need to understand that anti-Blackness is not only existing within the criminal justice system, right? It's existing within all systems, like you are saying, education, housing, employment, labor force, right? And so right now, when we talk about a pandemic, folks that are being affected are predominantly Black folks, right? Black bodies, those are essential workers, right, at the front lines, and those are being the most affected. The healthcare system does not, wasn't meant for Black bodies. And so again, that's another thing that's creating this divide. There's also like unemployment. People who are being unemployed predominantly are Black folks, right? Because of that, housing industry is very predatory right now against Black folks. Displacement has been generational for like Black folks as well. And so when we talk about allyship in every community right now, we have to think way beyond just like policing and criminal justice reform. It has to exist in every single work that we're doing, right? Housing, how are we going to do to make sure that not only do we address housing, but we address housing for Black folks, right? How do we make sure that this educational divide is not only, we're not creating equity, for POC, but we're also acknowledging that, access to technology, for example, Black folks are the ones that are being affected by that the most, right? How is that going to affect access to college and all that? And so it's really important for us to look at it that way. Allyship is going to be required by everyone in every single sphere in our society to really address and go against anti-Blackness in our systems.
I also, speaking of that, thank you, Oscar. I wanted to open it up to the white folks in the space, seeing that this system, even more so than non-Black people of color, directly benefits you all. How can white folks be more proactive allies and, not distract from this movement, add to it in a positive way? What and suggestions do you all have?
in the, day to day, obviously this is a huge global conversation that we're all currently having. In the day to day, what I found really effective right now is actually talking to the people around me. And when someone in my family says, this family friend that I've grown up with posted this thing, I'm deleting them, instead inviting that person to engage in a conversation. And like you were saying, kind of in that small amount of time, if you get them to move even an inch, it's an inch that wasn't there before. Where I'm really thinking about the bigger changes that can happen in a tangible way without overturning capitalism, which wouldn't be able to happen overnight, but maybe we get there. But in the sort of big picture conversations for corporations where there is a lot of whiteness in power, how do we take the steps to dismantle that white supremacy? And just look around. If you're flaunting these ideas and posting your shit on Instagram or whatever it is, and you look at your board and you look at the people in your company and you see that the people in your company do not reflect those ideas, step back and reconsider and make some actual changes. Ashley and I are really lucky to work in a place right now where the leadership at our company really has embodied the values that they talk about, and they have hired in a way that is proportional to the population, and you see it and feel it immediately. And it seems so obvious. And that to me seems like such a clear step that could impact so many big companies. So that's kind of where my head's at in terms of something that I can encourage people to do, people who are in managerial or hiring positions. Just look around, do the thing. What are you doing?
I think to touch on that point, I think I definitely agree with what you said. One thing I think people don't talk about is like, even if someone like wants to try and fix this, they're like, I care, I know the right things, I've read the right books. I think a lot of white people literally don't know what to do or how to do it, or they don't have, what am I trying to say? I'm dancing around it. It's like being a good ally to someone, being able to hear them or support them or do the things to like support the Black people in your life is not something that you can just like decide to do. It's a skill, or it's something that you have to do for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours to even be like useful at all at that. And I think people don't like, even people that are even progressive or like the DSA, like you can have correct ideas, but I think there's a lot of people who still have like segregated social networks. Like I encourage people to think like, if you're going out on a Friday or Saturday pre-COVID, who is in that group? Or I've had people come talk about like, I'm working in a nonprofit, I'm trying to get more diverse people on the board. It's like, well, who is in your social network? If you can't turn to someone or you don't know like how to get to the right people, it's never going to happen. Like you don't know how to make progress here because you're not living it every day. And the last thing I would add to that is that in general, I think people are motivated by things that affect them. And so if you're white and white supremacy doesn't affect you in a bad way, I think one of the only ways you're going to care and do even close to enough is if you have like genuine, deep, loving relationships with people who are affected. Because that was something that started changing my mind, was like, I knew that if I went to a venue or a store, I'm not going to be followed. But if I realize like my friend might be followed or my friend might get attacked in this situation, then you start to see how like I know I can move, very freely in a society, but at least I have a consciousness now that at any moment I can see how would someone else move in that moment. And that's not something I read. I can read that in a book. That doesn't bake it into your mind. It's being with someone 50 times and seeing 20 times where they got fucked with. That's what changes the way like my instincts and just my minute to minute like viewpoint is.
Yeah, I mean, both what Kate and James had shared. But I want to go back to like something that Timothy said that I really appreciated is like, take a step back. And I think I'm seeing that more than ever right now is like this movement. And I say this with dueling emotions of being so glad that folks are here now for whatever it is that woke you the fuck up. Like, I'm glad you're here, but also like, especially for people within my circle, and especially for folks who have been around me, whether you are a close friend or family member or not. Like, I know for myself, I am constantly talking about this. And so like, why now? And I am having a hard time not getting stuck on the fact that because it's a social media movement and that it's becoming, I don't want to say trend because I find that incredibly disrespectful to Black lives, but also I can't help but be critical of white folks in that. And I know that's something that we're even talking about and thinking about is like beyond this movement, or not movement, beyond this moment and this momentum currently, like, are you ready to ride? And part of that is taking a step back. And like, you don't need to post on your social media story that like you now understand what white privilege is, or like that you bought a list of books. Like, and that's great. Those are all things that need to be done, is to like educate yourself and, you know, doing the things on your own. So you're not looking to Black people in your lives to educate you, because that's not their job. Like, and, you know, if you have friends who are Black that have openly, you know, reached their arm out to you and asking like, what do you want to know? Then like, sure, that's a different story, but we need to stop asking our Black friends of like what to do. Like, just I feel like everything I'm saying is not anything new, and that Black folks in this space or in other spaces or in general have been saying. Like, Shar, you said it, look on Google, like you can build whatever you want, you can find what any book, like all of those things, like those are within our reach. And I think something even on top of that and really bringing it back to the individual is like, we need to stop being afraid to be wrong. And I say we because as much as I can sit here and share knowledge and be in this space, like I am just learning as much as anyone else, whether you all of a sudden were woken up yesterday or years ago. We as white folks are all in this, and understanding that if we don't challenge our own personal thoughts, like we cannot dismantle what is white supremacy. And ultimately what Diana had said is like abolishing it all, like abolishing all systems. Like this shows up in every single way, in the way that we're taught, and even in the way, the fact that we as white folks should feel that we should reach out to friends of color, and specifically Black friends, about what we should do, when quite frankly, like there's just so much we can do without having to resort to putting that further weight on Black folks. So I would say, like, don't be afraid to be wrong. Black people are not required to be your source of education. And if you know, are looking for more, there's other folks you can reach out to. There's Google. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like, that's it. Like, it's uncomfortable. You know, I don't like, you know, it's not fun on my Thanksgiving to have a conversation about like saying Native Americans and, you know, paying some level of homage to pilgrims, when it's like, oh, do you mean colonizers? Like, that's the rhetoric that we need to be having. That's not fun. That's, you know, I live across the country, but you know what? That's the duty that you take as in being a striving ally. And then also last piece is like asking yourself, what is your contribution? Like, and I really have tried to steer away from the word donate and really say give money, because we are not donating. It is part of the duty of allies. And specifically, I speak as a white ally, is like, what are you doing? How are you showing up? So yes, the self-work, the hard conversations with family and friends, doing your own, you know, education and what that looks like, but also like taking that a step further. Is it, you know, I learned this, like the way I think about it is like from church, but it's like your time, your talent, and your, it's a third T, treasure, which is most important, of money. So giving and looking and really seeking into those three aspects and asking yourself, like, how can I show up? And I can guarantee that there is somewhere that you can give money, because I know people, you know, we talk about like if you aren't able to give money, but specifically as white folks, you know, like check your budget, whether that's $5 a month to an organization. Like there's so many ways that we can be involved and be giving and showing up. And it's not just about teaching ourselves, because that's that self-consuming part that is, you know, important, critical, we have to be doing. But then what's the next step? Because to be an ally is to educate yourself, but then to bring the masses together and have people understand.
Oh, yes, Mimi.
Sorry, just one more point. First of all, that was great, Madi. I completely agree with everything that you said. But while you're talking, I was also thinking, and I feel on piggyback on the idea of thinking broader scheme, right? Thinking expanding. I think it's just understood in our conversations, but as a first generation / immigrant, I feel like we need to have these conversations across the seas, right? Like I feel like for first generation, we cut the conversation to our family here, at least for me. And I feel like as allies, as POC allies, we need to have these conversations with our relatives back in India, but also realize that they may not have the same education that we have as well, due to colonialization, due to our education system that is very for the white oppressor, or for us it was British. And to expand these conversations and realize where we can start. For us it can be colorism, right? Our gods are Black for Hinduism, but over the years we've whitened them till they're the color sky blue. You know, having these conversations, my family back there, they don't get what's going on here. They think, oh, someone died, why is there riots? That's it, simple. But we have to expand their mind on understanding what is race relations in America. So I'm sorry, I hope this is on tangent with what you were saying too, Madi, but it was just making me think of how we as first generation, we need to expand our conversations to not only continental, but to the diaspora, so.
As we've
Joseph,
been
go ahead.
thinking
Yeah,
about,
sorry. So I thought Joseph and then Kate to you.
Cool, I'll be quick. Yeah, I just wanted to echo what people have been saying about having these conversations. I actually wanted to challenge the step back part. Sorry, I mean, I get part of it, but I feel like right now is a real momentum, and then we need to be putting more and stepping up and moving up into these uncomfortable conversations right now. And I feel like that's why there's action being happened. James said something about when it doesn't affect you directly. Well, it's affecting white men directly when their teenage white daughters are yelling at them about racism, and it's in their very home for almost the first time, and they're taking videos and they're putting it on the internet. Like, these personal relationships are where this like all out battle is happening. It's a social movement because it's between people. And whoever you have access to that you've been thinking about talking to and saying something like, this is now the time to make that move. Don't put it off. And RJ, restorative justice, is the same. I feel like the same tactics we've talked about in our own communities. We need to recognize the pain, recognize the fears. So for a lot of my like white family or family that's just on this all lives matter, the destruction of property, they're scared. And I find that when I recognize, like, I see that you're scared that there was a fire near your suburban home related to this. I recognize that, but let's refocus on what we're really talking about. Your family's fine. Y'all are okay. Real, actual people, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Tamir Rice, all of them actually got attacked, killed. So that's that on that. Address the fear and then work from there if you're in the position to deal with them. Okay. I'm done.
Something that I've noticed in the way that these conversations are happening now, in a way that I wasn't noticing as much previously, was more people in my immediate circle who weren't working in education or maybe hadn't been doing this work for as long are starting to really think about the term white supremacy rather than racism. And I feel like that even that linguistic shift is really having an impact on how people are thinking about this. And the specific language that's becoming more and more sort of common parlance is giving people who are newer to this names for things that they're maybe experiencing or feeling or not sure what to do. You know, having a specific name, the more specific it is, the more active it can be. And having that sort of shift, I think so far in my circles has been really helpful, especially for some of like my parents and my parents' friends who aren't as active on social media, maybe aren't seeing all these things like flying around on everyone's stories. Being able to send them something really specific and talk about, okay, this is white supremacy. It doesn't mean the Klan exclusively. That is obviously overt white supremacy, but all of these things that you know, are probably participating in is part of this system that contributes to all of these other things. I think that shift has been really significant.
Thank you all. I appreciate the input. And really like, yeah, I always think about how can we use whiteness, how can we weaponize whiteness as a tool against white supremacy. And so I hope that's something that we can continue to talk about. But I want to take us to our next question. And just for context of the movement, Ashley and I, we started college at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, like when it was really sparking and growing. And since then, like we've seen the lives of Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Kia Boyd, Sandra Bland. We've seen so many names pop up over social media, over the protests that we've shown up to. Do you feel though like this moment is different? And I say that because you know, from seeing and being in the streets organizing at the beginning of the movement versus where the movement is now, I'm noticing things and I'm wondering, what do people see now, right? Is it something, do y'all feel that the movement has grown but has been co-opted in a way where nothing has really changed? Or do you think that some of the things that we've started to chip away at, the victories that we've started to win, resemble a larger systemic movement to something that's going to be recognized beyond this moment? So how do y'all feel? Do you feel like this movement or this moment is different? Do you feel like things have changed or not?
I think that this particular moment is very, very, very different, as we all can see. I think that, for lack of a better term, it was the perfect storm. It crosses off almost all of the boxes, right? Like I mentioned at the top of this, in May, we were inundated with headlines and visuals and videos. But in this particular case, we have Ahmaud Arbery, we have Breonna Taylor, a Black woman, we have Tony McDade, someone who's trans in the LGBT community, and then of course, George Floyd, which was the catalyst to that. You know, we watched, well, I didn't watch, but some people watched the video of his murder. And then, you know, we can't forget the times in the news, like I mentioned last month, where the microaggressions were amplified through people like Amy Cooper, what she did in Central Park, with literally weaponizing the police. So things have definitely reached a fever pitch. And then you want to throw COVID on top of that. People are in duress. People are tired. People are angry. And this just so happened to be, like I said, George Floyd just so happened to be, I guess, the kickoff moment to people really being fed up, because it just was coming at us left and right in May, coming at us. And so, yeah, this time is definitely different than any time that I can recall in recent history.
Could I add? Yeah, I totally agree. This time is definitely different, and the energy and the movement is really strong right now. And I can't help but, I mean, we got to put it in context of global production went to a pause. Everybody was in their houses in front of their phones, directly communicating with one another. We're not working 40 hours a week. A lot of people aren't. They have time to talk. They have time to think. I know my parents are now doing half of what they used to do. We had people really get their pockets hit by this pandemic. And then you throw on all the action in the streets. We can't go back to normal because we've been pushed so much in our whole system and the way we've structured everything already that it's working into our favor. When we're figuring out how to come out of this crisis, we need to be vigilant on every front, government, business, person to person, about how that transition is going to be. And this is our moment where we step in and strike and make things happen for liberation. And I concede my time.
Sorry, go ahead, Timothy. Look, we brother, we want to speak it. All right, go, brother, go.
It's all good. I would say for me, I'm kind of indifferent. I think that so much has happened within like the past week. It kind of feels longer than what it is. So like, as part of me, I'm like, okay, it's impossible to ignore what's going on. You're like kind of overloaded with like everything on your social media feeds or on the news, and we all have like this like hope that like, you know, the cries and like what we feel like is wrong in the world is finally being heard. But then also too, I think back to like instances like Colin Kaepernick, right? When he kneeled for the first time, like that was like a big moment. Like everybody was like, okay, I'm using my platform. Like it's literally impossible to ignore what's going on, and we all saw it. And then 6 months from then, it died down. The message got skewed. You know, just like with like the protests, they're talking more about the looting than they are like the actual cause and like why everybody is out there the same way that they did with that. So I'm just comparing like those two moments and those two like very impactful gestures and like demonstrations. And I want that to feel different. Like I have like optimism, but when we look at history and we look at like what's actually going on and like, you know, sort of like how the story is like being spun, I think we need a little bit more time to kind of, you know, in hindsight, look back and be like, okay, that, you know, this set us up for a whole new field or a whole new action that they can kind of take on moving forward. So.
Yeah, if I could just add here rather quickly, is I think one of the things that has been caught into the perspective here is how like the COVID pandemic has, in many different realms, has sort of given a kind of a slap on capitalism, if you will. Like everything had to stop in order for people to really truly pay attention to what's happening. Doesn't mean that everyone's going to listen. Doesn't mean that, you know, companies and corporations are still not going to make their money, right? Because Amazon is soaring. Like Amazon is absolutely soaring in the revenues that they're getting. But I think one of the things that, you know, Timothy just mentioned is, for me, what I've been able to see is how many parallels there are bringing up to, or how many parallels are connected to, for example, the 1992 uprisings in South LA, right? And I was just so like curious and wanting to figure out like, okay, let's try to see what these connections are. And I just recently went back and started watching LA 92 to watch a couple more documentaries about the 1992 you know, beating of Rodney King, the court case, the uprisings in the streets. And so all of these different elements are very similar to what is currently happening, except for the fact that everything is completely heightened to like the 10th degree because of social media, because of phones, because of everything else that is happening. And so I think it's like the manifestation of all of these different points coming together. We're hyper, like almost hyperventilating, if you will, of all the things that we're seeing on TV, on our phones, on our computers. But when I went back and looked at 1992, what was really interesting was identifying like what happened after also the killing of Latasha Harlins, and how that also started pitting people against each other, right? Korean Americans, Latinos, and Black communities like pitting against each other. And what did white supremacy do? They said this: hold up, not us, it's them, go ahead and go at it. And in this point, like, I think what can be different is when we pull on that and say, not here. How can we begin to make some of those changes? So that's some of the differences that I've seen. I have my eyes set out on the court case because, again, white supremacy is mischievous in the way that it operates. And let's not let's not think that like, you know, these 3 officers or 4 officers that are going to be tried in court, like what's going to be happening right after, right? That's something that we have to also look into. But on the positive side, I think what is currently happening, which is something that has been not necessarily on the mainstream level of a conversation, is defunding the police, right? That this policy aspect of being able to raise it up to a mainstream dialogue of defunding police, ending like the criminalization of Black and brown folks and Black folks through like the prison industrial complex. Like that is something that like we're seeing in this time how effective it has been, at least to start chipping away at that. Not that it's going to be an overturned change, but we're currently seeing a bit of that. And that, I think, to me is where the difference is coming in. But it's absolutely not the end of the story.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think, you know, we can't say that abolition has not been at the forefront of conversations. You know, we stand on the shoulders of giants of like Black women that have done the work of abolition for decades. But to really see it hit the mainstream, for conversations to actually be there, for people to even hear that soundbite of abolition, of abolish it all, abolish police, abolish the carceral state and prisons. I think we need to do the education of understanding what that means. I can't call myself an abolitionist because I haven't fully felt like I've done that work, but there's so many misconceptions about what that might mean. And I think for us to complicate this idea of listening and taking a step back, for allies, there's a sense of urgency because it's been since 1492, right? The opportunity to step back and listen. So we need to have a sense of urgency to really be able to take the momentum of what's happening right now and have those conversations be at the forefront.
I'd also like to add, earlier we were talking about the difference. Right now we're in a pandemic. I think when allyship, we think of allyship right now. I mean, there's no sporting events. There's no, everyone's at home. A lot of people have a lot of free time. And right now I call out to allies to make sure that even as we begin to return a little bit more to normal, their involvement in this and allyship in this movement cannot stop. It should increase, right? And so right now we're not gonna let anyone, go just post videos right now during this pandemic and then afterwards go back to our normalcy, because this that's not allyship, right? I also like the connection that Ernesto brought up from 1992 uprisings. There was a lot of like initiatives, government initiatives that were called for the uplifting of Black, brown communities at that time. All those government initiatives failed, right? Because they did not center, again, like folks who were being affected at the forefront. Presidential candidates at that point, Clinton and Senior Bush, actually came to South Central, used that as their platform, then created this like, promise zones that were gonna fund these communities, community resources. And at the end, none of that happened. A lot of nonprofits were like, okay, we're gonna rebuild South LA, we're gonna rebuild these Black, brown communities, none of that happened. And so right now, when we talk about abolition, we talk about defunding the police, it all has to be really, truly led by Black folks, right? And also, like when we talk about how does that change look, like we need to give power. These institutions need to give power to Black folks and not only have like resources, but like actual, genuine, literal power.
And if I could add just really quickly, because it speaks to both what Oscar and what Madi were saying as far as allyship and showing up, I do think that we will see a lot of people hopping off of the quote unquote bandwagon on the other side of this. I think that the true test will be that when the dust settles, then how are you showing up? Who are you hiring? What are you doing? Because right now, I mean, if we're going to keep it a buck, there's a lot of performance art going on online right now, a lot of it. And that's why we're seeing people and companies being called out all up and down, you know, timelines, because it's like you just want to make sure for optics purposes that you're on the right side of history, but it's not showing up in the ways in which you navigate the world.
And to really use a Sharism, to keep it a buck, you know, I also want to pose this question to specifically the Black people in this space and talk about intersectionality in the movement, because even we Black people have a lot to do in terms of uplifting queer Black lives, uplifting trans Black lives, uplifting undocumented Black lives, et cetera, in this movement. And so I wanted to just get Timothy and Shar's opinion on, you know, how we can make this movement more intersectional moving forward.
Well, I would just say I think this is a good time to kind of check your own. Well, at least for me, I can speak for like me and like sort of like my peers as like Black men. I think it's just important for us to kind of check our own privilege too in this type of environment. I can notice myself sometimes, like when I'm advocating in person or like online, that I might shout out all the names that are known and that people are like widespread or that went viral. But then when something happens to someone else that isn't highlighted as much, women, trans men, like they might be a little bit more quiet or hesitant to kind of speak up. So just making sure that you're conscious of like how, you know, all at these different intersections, even some intersections may make you more susceptible to this brutality and then make you more susceptible to people kind of sweeping you underneath the rug. And I think, I think that's what this whole movement is about. And that should not get lost in anybody's messages or, you know, in their intentions. I think every day it's on us, and it's responsibility on us to kind of check that and make sure that we take an initiative to speak up and use our voices on that. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I've been trying to gather my thoughts about this because I literally have been bitching about this for weeks now. It feels like weeks because I agree with you, Timothy. I think that the onus solely rests in cisgender, heterosexual Black men's laps. And this is a conversation that I'm iffy having because I feel like it's in-house, but in the same ways that we are demanding that non-Black people have uncomfortable conversations, I think the onus solely rests in cis het Black men's life. A lot of Black women, cisgender heterosexual Black women, are complicit in perpetuating the ideas, but I think, and based on my own personal experience and observations, that because of white supremacy, a lot of Black men are kind of enforcing these ideas. And when I say these ideas, I mean the further oppression of marginalized people within our community. And I think that it also speaks to how none of us will be free until all of us are. You cannot combat oppression with oppression. And until it's going to take burning it all down, so to speak. I'm using air quotes. So if we're going to go after racism, we also need to go after sexism. We also need to go after misogyny. We also need to go after homophobia. We also need to go after transphobia. And I know oftentimes as a trans woman, I feel lost within this movement because I don't even see cis Black women get their just due. Breonna Taylor's hashtag was almost lost in the sauce of all of this. You get what I'm saying? And one could even argue, I'm not even that big of a fan of whataboutism, but one could argue that if George Floyd were a gay man, a gay Black man, that all of this wouldn't be going on. One could argue that if George Floyd were Gina Floyd, all of this wouldn't be going on. And so I think that it is going to be a call to action, even though in this movement, you know, Black Lives Matter was started by queer women. And it's funny because it seems like queer women's lives don't matter in the larger discussion. And so I think it is solely going to rest on straight, cis Black men to call each other out and call each other to the carpet. And then hopefully it'll have a trickle down effect, because it's easy to feel detached, you know, especially as a Black woman, because Black women deal with police brutality, but Black women also deal with a lot of intimate partner brutality as well. So it's like, we got to call a thing here and just bust it down to the gristle in order to get to a solution.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more thing, and it's super brief. I think too, just what your comments made me think of is like, it shouldn't be an afterthought. Like, I think a lot of times when these people that aren't highlighted all the time, it's not been like, oh, we want to recognize all the Black lives that have been lost. Oh, and Black women. Like, it shouldn't come after. It should kind of, if anything, I think the proper way to be is kind of, if we know that that's a group that usually, whatever group it is, that usually gets lost, like you said, lost in the sauce, or put on like the back burner. Talk about those names first. Talk about those names first, because that's where, when these conversations start, people tend to pay attention to like the first couple of things that said, the first couple of posts that said. So post those first, and then anytime other situations come up, when a situation is as like public and open to the public to see, like George Floyd's murder, that's going to get its recognition. So give yourself the opportunity, and give other people the opportunity to make sure that you say those names, and you bring up those situations and those conversations first, because ultimately those aren't the ones that's cared about. So.
Yeah, and it's patriarchy that has us constantly centering men in this. That's why I say we got to bust it all down, and I do want to reiterate that point, that you cannot combat oppression with oppression, especially within our own communities. You can't expect me to be on the front lines, championing for you if in theory, if I'm murdered tomorrow, you won't even bat an eyelash for me.
Shar, thank you so much for raising that up. And I just want to highlight what you mentioned about that queer Black women started the Black Lives Matter movement. And we talk about how the onus should be on allies to be combating the systems that are directly traumatizing Black folks. But consistently, it's Black women, it's trans women, it's queer women who rise to the call of action. This very webinar, this very town hall was hosted and formed by Ashley. And so just knowing myself as a Black man, Black cishet man, like what my role is in the movement, and also isn't to achieve white male privilege, right? It's not to be able to ascend to this idea of being able to benefit from white supremacy, but rather to dismantle it. And the only way to do that is if all of our Black folks are being cared for, are being loved, are being defended, are being stood behind and next to. And so thank you so much for raising that. And I'm going to take us to our last question. So talking about the spirit of change and next steps, we've seen some really huge wins in the form of the Minneapolis City Council saying that they're prepared to begin the process of dismantling the Minneapolis police, of seeing the Minneapolis, seeing their school board vote to end their contract and relationship with the city's police department. So in your view, what do y'all feel, what do you think it would take to end this state-sanctioned violence, to end the state-sanctioned violence that is being inflicted upon Black folks? What are some of the tangible steps to achieving that vision? So those are some of the things that are in the works. But what do y'all feel will be tangible steps that we can see a world where Black lives truly are value protected and are not falling victim to state-sanctioned violence? And Ernesto had to leave us, but appreciate Ernesto for being in the space.
Don't get mad at me, but can you repeat the tail end of the question? That was a lot.
Yes, a little loaded. So what do y'all feel, what do you think it will take to end state-sanctioned violence and the killings of Black people? And what are the tangible steps to ending the state-sanctioned violence and deaths of Black people?
And I think, we've been hearing this discussion of abolish the police versus, defund the police versus reform versus completely tearing it down. They have like the 8 can't wait. Like, what do we think are like some plausible, tangible ways that this can be solved?
If I could jump in. I see this system as a machine, as a monster. And when we look at what I think someone said, Paul said earlier about weaponizing whiteness to dismantle white supremacy. How can we shift the energy that's going into fueling the monster into deconstructing itself? So the energy we're putting, the budget we're putting towards police, it's needs to be shifted and redirected, redirect that energy directly into the communities affected and all our mental health, housing, community programs, social welfare. I've been breaking it down for a lot of my family, like 30% of your city budget is going to police. In LA, it's more than 50%. In Seoul, South Korea, it's 4%. Those kind of like, we need to shift things. It makes sense to people. We need to look outside of our context because a lot of American cities are like copy paste, like 30 to 50% of the police budget. And I think it's happening. We're already seeing it happening in Minnesota at the city level. So I think every city needs to come together and talk about rolling back funding and just redirecting it. And maybe we get to that point, we just keep redirecting till there's no more police, or maybe there's like 2 officers and they don't even have guns. But it just depends on where you're at and who you can get together to look at that local policy and really see the change and set up policies so that they can't just be rolled back over time, because that's what we're seeing time and time again, that they dismantle something and then over the years it gets built back up. So that's local level, start with defunding, take it as far as you can go.
If I can just hop on to what Joseph just said, I want to recommend a podcast if I can. It's an episode, the podcast is named Getting Grown, hosted by Jaden Kia, but they just had an episode named Say It Loud that featured Brittany Packnett Cunningham. And what I learned from listening to that episode was a lot about police unions. Police unions are really the issue. Like, some of them are racking in $1 million a month, and they are able to kind of redline these rules, like, you know, that police can view evidence before they go to trial, like all these little like nitpicky, and it varies city to city. But I do think that a lot of the funds could be better redistributed that goes into the police. There are certain communities within the United States that their schools don't have a school nurse, but they got police. There, you know, with mental health, some things that go on with people in mental health, they don't have the professionals there to aid and help with that, but they have police. And so I think that just to echo those sentiments, it needs to be gutted. It is a system, it is a monster, and it reinforces white supremacy, whether you want to admit it or not. And then, like I mentioned at the top, the good cops, a lot of the quote unquote good cops are no longer cops, okay? Because if they're still on the force, they're likely complicit in some nonsense. And so it just needs to be gutted. It needs to be gutted. I don't know. I don't really have faith in reform right now. I don't, personally. I don't, because there's no way to tell or police, you know, who's for what and who's not for what. And then they take that energy out in the streets. And like I said, police unions, there's loopholes where people can cut off their cams and do their things, and they're protected by this. So I feel like all of this needs to be really, really examined. I don't have any kind of like tangible points that I can offer. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. The funds need to definitely be redispersed amongst communities, especially sensitive communities.
I think to go off on, thank you, Shar, for sharing that. For allies specifically, and just thinking of a very like micro level, we can't wait for violence in order to feel the compassion and the urgency to do something about white supremacy. And we, first and foremost, and especially on social media, do not perpetuate violence by sharing videos that show violence on Black folks. And don't focus, allies, I think we cannot focus only on pain narratives in order to feel the need to do something about this. And, you know, in terms of really systematically doing something about white supremacy and capitalism, and going back to what Oscar said about, you know, anti-Blackness and white supremacy is rooted in all these systems, is like, we need all the strategies. And the way, you know, I think about it is like, we need a strategy within the state, we need a strategy against the state, and we need a strategy without the state, creating different spaces that are Black-led, that are you know, funded, you know, independently without us relying on these systems. And I think for allies, like, find where you want to plug in and just do it. Because Black lives mattered yesterday, they matter today, and they have to matter tomorrow. And lastly, I just want to make myself available for folks interested in having these conversations in Spanish, to continue to work on that, to dismantle those narratives, from those really harmful narratives from Spanish media.
What everyone has shared is, yeah, just all of it, all of it, all of it. And in terms of just what I share, specifically as I said, speaking to white folks, there's a few things that were brought up. One, in terms of like changing policy or defunding or what that looks like. I think we need to continue as white folks putting that pressure, that people power, doing what we can, whether that's voting for legislative change, whether that's petitioning budget cuts for your local PD and or defunding it completely, making phone calls to your state attorneys to demand the indictment of, you know, killer cops, participating in actions with your local organizers. And all of that comes from, you know, I hear this idea of like, you know, not speaking or speaking, but when I say, you know, taking a step back, it's not necessarily taking a step back and not being a part of the movement, but some people are going to ask you to be quiet and others are going to ask for you to be vocal. But ultimately, all as like white allies, it's constantly just centering yourself or centering Black voices, amplifying Black voices. Both being quiet and speaking are both necessary simultaneously, but it's going to take practice and learning how to discern what each moment requires. And so always keeping and challenging yourself, but also, like I said, you know, being okay with not being right, and also being okay with being called out when maybe you did need a step up or when you did not. But either way, just what everyone is saying, there is no there's no more time. There hasn't been time. The time has ran out. So constantly staying in touch and involved and not losing that. And then one last piece, especially in terms of when we think about defunding, I don't necessarily have an idea of what it looks like, but I just keep coming back into this idea of tapping into like creativity and innovation. And I think we have to ask ourselves to think of community safety completely different and what we have. Because as community safety is being police, that is obviously not what is keeping folks safe. And ultimately that is going to be informed by those most impacted, being Black folks. And so another moment where it's taking a step back and listening to the ideas and the plan that is being created. And then as white folks just getting on board and double downing on that message and supporting that, because that's it.
I kind of said earlier too, but again, like these are all multiple systems. So like right now we're going against city police departments, but sheriffs are also part of that system. ICE is part of that system. Abolish everything, honestly.
Yes. So yeah, this is obviously not the end of this conversation, and not something that we could even possibly wrap up in 2 hours. but we definitely wanted to take this conversation in the direction of next steps and action, because I think that's where a lot of folks are at right now. And, you know, like folks have raised up the ways that we can contribute to the movement as Black folks and as allies, to sign petitions, to give our money, to show up, to protest, to be intentional about supporting Black business and putting our dollars into Black business, to hold everyday conversations centering race, doing the research ourselves and not putting the labor on the people who are most impacted to answer those questions, but for us to be curious and be able to have the savvy to actually find those answers independently when we need to, and amplifying the voices of Black folks in all spaces, not just symbolically, but also in terms of the professions that they're in, being able to see Black folks actually rise through the different organizations that they give their labor to. And so in the spirit of like working towards those actionable steps, Ashley and I had just found some resources online that are not at all comprehensive, but give just like a wide range of different resources that you can tap into. So if you're looking for a petition, they have links to petitions. If you're looking for a place to donate, they have links to donate. If you're looking for resources on how to talk about this with your parents, they have links to that too. So two of the websites that I'll mention, I'll put it in the chat, and then also Ashley will follow up at a later date and have, you know, on her Instagram actually have these things shown. But one of the resources is on fortune.com and the other is on adhoc.fm. So I'll leave that in the chat for all of our participants, and encourage you, if they not just to for yourselves, but for folks who are looking to get involved, who just don't know what to do, or keep acting like they don't know how to Google something. You know, you might just leave it on your story and be like, hey, there it is. Help you get there half the way. Now you got to do the rest of the work. So definitely want to continue to carry that energy of action, and, you know, look at each other as resources in this work. You know, if we're following each other, you know, we're going to see the things that we're posting. And so just, you know, reminding you all that we see you, and the work that you're doing is absolutely not alone. It's in community. So I want to reaffirm that, and I'm going to pass it back to Ashley.
Yes, I'm just truly so, like, my heart is really full right now. That I know all of these extraordinary people, and B, that, you know, we were able to have this conversation and hopefully model the conversations to come in the future. And I just really want to say, like, yo, I woke up last week and just like, I want to have a town hall, and I made this shit fucking happen because I care about Black lives. And we have to get out of this mentality that we're powerless. We have to get out of this like mentality that we ourselves can't make a change. Like, everyday actions can make a change. And I really hope this inspires everyone out there to do so, and like really realize that, like I think someone said earlier, that once Black Lives Matter, all lives will truly matter. Like, we're not making this shit up. Like, it's really out there. As Shar said before, like, you need to do the research, you need to educate yourselves, and ultimately decide which team you're going to be on. Either you're going to be on the right team, or you're going to be on the Madi team that we are not going to recognize or acknowledge anymore. Because at this point, this shit is, we've been through this way too long. 400 plus years of oppression. It's done. We're done. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone at home for participating, for, you know, staying on for 2 hours. I'm going to be uploading this. I recorded it. I'm going to upload it tomorrow to my YouTube channel, so that you can share. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. And I also, as Paul said, will be uploading a comprehensive list. Diana has, you know, graciously volunteered to translate it into Spanish. If you want to translate it into another language and have me post it as well, please DM me on my Instagram at Welcome to Ashleyland. We need to make sure these conversations are accessible and inclusive to everybody. To my allies, you all have some fucking work to do, and I hope you're ready, because we're ready to hold you accountable. To my Black people, I love you. I see you. I hear you. I'm doing this for you. I've been to 4 protests in 1 week because that's how much I care about our lives. And you don't have to protest. You can do a whole host of other things at home. This is accessible for everyone to be in the defense of Black lives. But also remember to take care of yourselves, because this is truly a marathon and not a sprint. We can't just dismantle centuries of white supremacy in 1 day, 1 month. And so, just make sure you're taking care of yourself. And lastly, I just wanted to close with some libations. Black Lives Matter does this after all of their protests, and it truly is like moving and really powerful to me. And so I know it's kind of weird because we're all on different Zoom waves, but I would love if you guys could repeat after me. If you all could repeat after me at home, we're gonna do this twice. This is a chant by that has been taken from Assata Shakur, who is one of our lovely Black movement leaders. And really just take the time to, when saying this, think of our ancestors, think of all the people we're fighting for, because we will win. When we fight, we win. And that's something that I know is true. And so please repeat after me. It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our
duty to win.
We must love each other and support each other.
We must love each other and support each other.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have
nothing to lose but our chains.
We're gonna say it one more time with a little bit more power and gusto. And I need to hear the people from at home. I need you to say it out loud. It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
We must love each other and support each other.
We must
love each other and support each other.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing
to lose but our chains.
Ashe, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in, and catch me next week, next Tuesday, with another creative video or something like that. But until next time, Black Lives Matter. I love you guys. Bye.
Love you, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley. We love you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.